Hello and welcome. I'm Kamla. My guest today is filmmaker Richard Linklater. We talked to him about his new film, The Last Flag Flying. The film stars Bryan Cranston, Steve Carell, Laurence Fishburne, and others. Here's a clip from the film, and then our interview with filmmaker Richard Linklater.
Because of my son, I came here, found you guys. A year ago, we joined the Corps, and then 2 days ago, they told me that he'd been killed. He's gonna be buried in Arlington, and I was wondering if you guys could come with me. I've come to you in search of some... He sent him off to a godforsaken desert. Why? I'm taking Larry home.
With all due respect, sir, he deserves to lie at Arlington.
You're gonna take Doc back, try to make it fun.
You're cutting off your nose to spite your face.
Did you look at these faces? They've already been spited. I thought we were going to a funeral.
We are going to a funeral. Just looks like it's gonna take a little longer to get there.
What you gonna do? Strap the coffin to the roof of your car?
We could do that.
Oh man, look.
The thing that made Larry different from the rest of us, he had a happy childhood.
He said that?
Welcome to San Francisco.
Thank you. Always enjoy being here.
You have connections to the city, don't you?
Very much, yeah. My mom grew up in the area. I have cousins here who've been here for I think they're like sixth generation.
Really?
We're going way back, way back.
Where, in the city?
My Italian cousin side. Yeah, just the area. Like I said, my mom grew up here, so.
Where, in the city?
Kind of Monterey.
Okay.
Carmel.
Okay, so that's why, yeah, there was...
But, you know.
Is she of Italian heritage?
No, my cousins are.
Okay, so as a young kid, did you come down here often?
Not really, no. I didn't start coming here till adulthood. I never left Texas till I was in my early 20s.
Ah.
Just, we didn't have any money, and Texas is a big state just to get out of. So only when I got a little older and started traveling on my own, I started coming here quite a bit.
So, The Last Flag Flying. You read the book when it came out in 2005, and you were making your film, The Boyhood, then?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I started Boyhood in '02. Started shooting that, and I read Last Flag Flying in '05. It never really came out. It was more or less an unpublished novel. They had made a certain amount of copies, but it was kind of floating around, and I was curious about it. Read the book, really loved those characters and what it was trying to say about middle-aged guys coming back together, Vietnam, that they had something in their past, and how time changes you and doesn't. Yeah.
And so the sculpting in time is something, it's a favorite phrase of yours, right? To use one of your mentors.
Yeah, well, that's Tarkovsky. His book, Sculpting in Time, I always advise anyone interested in cinema to read his book, just about art, but specifically, it's about cinema too. And because I think that's what, I read that at a pretty early age, in my 20s when I was just taking in everything to do with cinema from every angle possible. I was really defining myself. So when I read that, it was like, oh yeah, that is the fundamentals of cinema, time, how you're manipulating it. And there are properties to cinema that are unique to other art forms. And
what are those properties?
He had quite a bit to say about it. Is the linearity and the ability to shape time that you can't in certain other mediums because of the way you perceive it, but film, how through editing and pace and you really can, what you can imply about time and how it unfolds. And I always thought that was pretty close to the way our brain operates. I've always thought about that a lot, how time unfolds in our minds, more so than the linear fashion of how we live our lives. That's pretty obvious, but it's really more how we process it through dreams, sleep, awakening, daydreaming. It doesn't feel like a linear path.
It's episodic? Yeah,
well, and we're also dealing with memories and future projections, so it's not any one thing. We don't perceive it as such. It's a linear journey, obviously, but it doesn't feel that way. So I think cinema has that ability to kind of capture that, compress time, elongate time.
So I'm thinking of the Japanese filmmakers. They also have a very interesting perspective on memory and linearity and stuff like that, right? Each one of us brings a point of perspective.
Yeah, well, it's a powerful, cinema's a powerful storytelling medium. It can be a lot of different things, and I think the goal of every filmmaker is just to tap into how your own mind works and your own sensibility, and create a form that cinema's there as a form that you can make that work for whatever you're trying to express. You know, there's a long history of, I mean, they call them experimental films, but I would never like that term so much, just avant-garde. You know, it's a very, obviously it's such a visual medium. You can say so much with it and tell so many different stories, so many different ways. So ultimately it's up to and there's so many examples from around the world to learn from. So.
Are you a very vivid visual thinker?
Yeah, I think so. I have a very specific, vivid memory of everything. And I guess I didn't really realize it, but I had this kind of visual, it's some version of photographic memory. It's not like I can open a book, shut it, and read it in my mind, but I did have you know, I got tested as a kid, something weird. My mom thought something weird was going on, but I was able to, they would read a bunch of numbers and I could read them backwards, and they kept increasing the number, and pretty soon I look up, there was a room full of people kind of looking at me, they were applauding. I'm like a little kid, and they're, well, how are you doing that? And I said, oh, I can hear the numbers and then I can see them, and then I can just read them backwards. So I had this kind of visual, but I didn't, you know,
and your mom
it didn't help me in school. You know, it didn't make me a better student, but I just had this thing. So I realized, because I always was a writer. You know, I thought I'd grow up where I lived, and as a kid, I thought, oh, that's my one means of expression, because I wasn't a particularly great musician and I didn't have songs rolling out of me, but I did feel like
But you were a baseball player.
Had to express myself. Yeah, and I was detoured into sports, which was fun, and I loved that. But as far as expressing myself personally, artistically, I felt writing was it. And it wasn't until my early 20s that I really started kind of discovering film. And then I was thinking like, oh, I could just see the films in my head. Like, oh, I would cut there. I just could edit. And I had all the info, like a short story I'd written, I adapted to a script. I said, well, how would this be as a film? And then I could just see the whole movie. So I thought, oh, maybe that's I was drifting toward that, like, oh, maybe that's my medium, because I could store all this visual information in my head for long periods of time. And actually, that's a skill like you should have as a director. You know, there's a lot of really, really smart, passionate, brilliant people in the world who aren't film directors because they probably don't have, it's kind of like a musician who can't, you know, carry a tune, you know, as a singer or a musician. So I don't know, and it's hard to describe. In Tarkovsky's book, Sculpting in Time, he talks about, you know, you need to discover. He was several films into his brilliant, you know, 7-film all masterpiece career, but he still wasn't 100% sure he was a film director.
But he also died young.
Yeah.
You know, so when you read the book, I read somewhere that you said, oh, this is a movie. So you were visualizing when you were reading it. Now, I have read that this is a war movie, but I don't know if you had it as a war movie, because it's like I was thinking when I read Tarkovsky and how he says emotions are what you should be kindling. You know, I'm paraphrasing what he's saying. So I thought the film kindles each one of our memories about these two wars, Vietnam War and the Iraq War. How did you, first of all, you know, I think labeling, I don't know if it serves any purpose. How would you describe the film?
Yeah, it's a lot of things. I mean, you could say it's a middle-aged guy's road movie. It's, I consider it, well, people ask, is it a war movie? And I said, well, it's my kind of war movie. Like, I'm not interested in making a battle scenes and war. That doesn't interest me very much. But this was my kind of war movie.
Which means what?
When the book was out, people were like, oh, well, it's not a movie. And I said, well, it's my kind of movie. I see a movie here, and I respect that others wouldn't, because it was really just, there's not a lot of action. It's a bunch of guys talking. I said, well, I've been doing that my whole life. That's what my movies are. It's like these people trying to communicate.
But why should your movies be labeled as talking movies? Because that's one kind of movie. I don't understand.
I don't know what that means either.
Yeah, so why do you subscribe to it
with
then?
a lack of other things? Well, I just say, a character piece, you know, that's much more concerned. I mean, if you want to jump into the war genre, which I'll happily do, I'm more on a couple levels. I'm not a battlefield movie or a mission-based movie. I'm a character-based movie. And also, so many war movies feel like they're done by generals who are treating the soldier. You know, it's all about the mission and the taking the hill, and they're kind of. And I think a lot of directors fall into that pretty easily. It's natural. You know, you have a ton of extras and you're doing a big war movie, but the people are kind of undifferentiated. This is the other complete opposite of that. You know, you're seeing these wars echoed through three individuals who have been through it and then and now in different ways. And it's really just about their lives. So it's kind of from the bottom up perspective of that. But it is how wars affect you then and now, and how they affect a culture, and you know, how they feel on you years later and during. So,
do you like the word muddled? Because that's been used by The Economist and a couple of other reviewers, I think, that the movie is muddled. Politically doesn't tell you what it is. And I was thinking, maybe we're all muddled when we think about wars and our attitude towards it.
well, I could see where they're going, because it almost refuses a simple answer. And so you could call that muddled or confused, but I kind of choose to think of it as all the profoundly mixed feelings, the love-hate relationship that develops between a soldier and the military. You know, they've earned it, they're on the inside, but as a citizen, you can have profoundly mixed feelings about how we're approaching using these young people's best. They're giving you themselves in a way, and that's not being reciprocated necessarily from the command. It's always been that way. It's always been that way. It's a top-down, you know, the military, it couldn't be a more top-down bureaucracy. And the people at the bottom really never know or can understand or totally appreciate what's going on above them. It's always when it's over, it's like, okay, well, that worked or that didn't work. But while it's happening, the guys are just, you know,
Following the orders.
following orders and realizing that's the job. And part of the human spirit kind of rebels at that. We want to be a little more autonomous, but
I was going to say independent.
yeah, but that's not what war is. It's something else entirely. So the people involved get this love-hate thing. And so I think the film can be very critical. I think it's possible to be anti-war and extremely patriotic at the same time.
I think that's what Cranston's character kind of depicts, because he, I thought, was the most patriotic and also the one with very clear right and wrong, whereas Fishburne didn't.
Yeah. They have very different mentalities toward Sal, Bryan Cranston's character, is very much on this like truth, and he's looking for some kind of absolutes. And
yet he wavers when they go to meet their
there's
old lady in Boston, was it?
Yeah, they see an old buddy's
Mom.
They look up the mom of a fallen comrade from 30 plus years ago, and you know it's Cicely Tyson. When they look in her face and they just can't tell her, they realize truth is rather a blunt instrument when it comes to exactly what happened. Why rob this woman of what she feels her son's sacrifice was for versus what it maybe was.
So it raises a lot of questions about why we go to war. And
I think the kind of cultural myths or untruths, you could say, that develop to maybe go to war in the first place. You know, populations need to be kind of lied into war. And this day and age, it's been a long time since the Japanese have attacked Pearl Harbor, Hitler's taking over Europe. You know, like that was, okay, here's why. Everything since has been, you know, here's why we're doing it. It's a little murky. History doesn't really support the initial impulse to war, and then it becomes an issue of, well, should we cut and run now? And then all those heroes left behind. It becomes a huge huge, complex mess, and no one at the end of it can say why.
Apparently, you were shooting the film while the presidential elections were going on in 2016, and you shot a very touching scene right after the elections.
Yes. Day after the election, we were shooting the scene at Dover Air Force Base in the hangars where there's 5 flag-draped coffins. And the next day was Veterans Day, too. We were there then. It was just, even though you're making a movie and those are props and there's no one inside those coffins, it's really profound, depicting that and the emotions the actors have to get to and where you're at with that. It was, and kind of where you thought our country was at that time. It was, we'll never forget it, put it like that.
Did you have a track from Neil Young in the film?
No, we don't.
You don't? Old Man? What?
It's in the trailer.
It's in the trailer, but not in the film.
No,
yeah.
but which is kind of perfect for the
Okay.
Neil Young and Bob Dylan and people of that.
Yeah, you had a song for every decade when I looked at
have a Levon Helm song in the movie too, in the funeral. So.
I want to go back to how you became a filmmaker. So you're working in an oil rig, you saved up $18,000, and then you went back to Austin, founded the Austin Film Society, and then you watched movies obsessively.
Yeah.
How did you watch them? Did you watch them as I would do, just go and watch the film? Or did you watch them to see how the director directed a scene or the camera, how the camera moved?
Everything. Once I was just completely in love with cinema. I would imagine the way a musician, a songwriter listens to music.
I don't know how they do, that's why I'm asking you.
Yeah, so, but it's probably the way you're absorbing all of it. Everything that's impressing you about a certain movie, or not impressing you sometimes.
But sometimes you have to have a clear intention.
Yeah, well, I think it's good to go in kind of a blank slate. I mean, but it's good. Movies look very different once you started to make a movie. Just make a short film and edit it. You'll see movies differently. And then that really kicks off your understanding of, oh, that's an interesting choice. What they're doing with the camera, lighting, texture, performance. There's so many elements go into a movie that it's kind of endless. So no one can ever know it all. But, and then you kind of find your own sensibility in that and what you like. And also, I think some of my deepest appreciation for filmmakers who are very unlike, have a skill set that I'm far from possessing. I'm like, wow, you're just sort of amazed that, oh, wow, that's in another world. But then often I've run into some of these filmmakers who are alive and they can't understand how I do what I do, either. Like they wouldn't think that's a movie. 2 people in dialogue for 80 minutes of real time. Some of my movies, they're like, oh, they wouldn't occur to them that is cinema. So we're all coming from a different angle.
Why do you understate that you're not a trained filmmaker? Because you probably paid your dues much more than others who went to school. I mean...
Yeah, 30 years in, I feel like I've trained.
No, I want to interrupt you real quick. Even the first film that you said was commercially successful, The Slackers. You spent years making that film. And thinking about it and everything.
Oh, yeah, I never...
So why do you understate? Why do you...
I don't. I quickly follow up that I only took 2 film classes at Austin Community College, which were very rigorous. You say community college, it was tough, wrote a lot of papers, had to really study films, but I loved it. There'd be a 2-page paper due, I would write an 8-page paper. There'd be write a 4-page paper, I'd turn in a...
Why? Why would you write?
So I was so enthusiastic. I had so much to say. It was really just the first time I was able to put my thoughts. So academia, I think you can use that for whatever, however it fits with you or however different people have different approaches. But I never made the mistake of thinking that I was educated or that ever stopped. So I saw it as a lifetime process. I'm still learning. I remember Kurosawa was getting a Lifetime Achievement Award in his 80s and said he still kind of felt like a student. And people say, oh, that's fake humility, but I kind of know what he means. You're still learning. You're learning about yourself and that's okay. So I think by not being, I didn't get my master's from UCLA or USC or something. So that's okay. It's just, I'm in the student for life while still being, a professional and highly experienced and prolific in my own way. I still am feeling like I'm a little behind and still have a long way to go, which isn't a bad place to work from.
So this brings to mind what Tarkovsky said in an interview, that the more you know, you realize the less you know. So which is what you're subscribing to. But he also said something about films, and that's my last question. You should belong to it. It should not belong to you. You should belong to it, I think he said. That is, you should belong to the film.
Yeah, I think
something
he's talking about, I have this in the process of like trying to make a film like it exists outside of you, that I'm trying to let it become what it wants to become. And that's your intentions, your script, who you've cast, what your approach is technically, everything about it. But I think you can only impose your will so much. You know, it's its own living, breathing entity. So I think, yeah, you kind of belong to it as you're ushering it into existence, but maybe it's kind of like a parent. Does the kid belong to you? No, they're their own living, breathing thing. You help them birth into the world, depending on, you know, but they are separate from you. So like, that film can feel that way too.
What's the next project?
I'm editing a film I shot this summer that I'm excited about.
Is it on that Bernstein?
It's a woman's middle-age crisis, middle-age crisis movies. Where'd You Go, Bernadette, with Kate Blanchett.
Oh, best of luck with that.
Oh, good talking to you. Thank you.
And thank you for your time.
Yeah, of course.
And that was our interview with filmmaker Richard Linklater. We talked to him about his new film, The Last Flag Flying. And now here's a clip from an interview that we did with a local San Francisco Bay Area filmmaker, Pete Nix. We talked to him about his documentary, The Force, which is about the Oakland Police Department. My guest today is Pete Nix. His film, The Force, won an award at the 2017 Sundance Film Festival. He's an Oakland-based filmmaker, and he's making a trilogy of films on Oakland, and the second of that trilogy is called The Force. How did you come up with the name, The Force?
Well, it's a name that describes the department. It's literal. It's also sort of
the police department.
The police department, the police force. It's also sort of a metaphor. This idea of you know, the duality of force. You know, force can be good and it can be evil. You know, and also the notion of the use of force. You know, and this is why police departments around the country right now are being called to task about their use of force, their use of power, particularly in communities of color, where you have communities like Oakland, where you have predominant communities made up of large groups of African Americans or Hispanics, and so that was something that we wanted to kind of try to frame the film with the appropriate title.
Was that the title that you came up with, The Force, or did you have other working titles?
We tried tons of titles but there's been so many police movies, it's kind of like a genre, and so they've all been used on some level. It was one of the early ones, and it just kind of was hanging around, and we tried getting clever with the title to come up with something really new, but in the end, that one really kind of captured the complexity of the film, the duality, the double entendre idea of the film.
So the first in the trilogy is about the healthcare system,
yeah,
the waiting room. Second is this. And the third one that you are, I guess, making is on education?
Yes, we're sort of in early development on that, but the idea is to sort of tell the story of an American city through the three pillars, what I call the three pillars of access to health care, criminal justice, and education, which if you look at the relationship between those three, there's so much interaction between those three that dictates the agency of a community, whether it's a young child trying to graduate, who has been shot, who's missing days of school, who then drops out of school, then finds themselves in the criminal justice system. So the interaction between those three systems and examining the role that those institutions play in our community is really the foundation of Openhood's work.
Openhood is the name of your organization.
Yes.
If you missed any of our episodes, you can watch them on our YouTube channel or on our website, kamlashow.com. And we'll be back again next week with another episode. Until then, goodbye and thank you for watching.